After 20 years in the Navy, I craved quiet. I found it in Pinebrook Estates, a gated slice of suburbia tucked against the base of the hills. Neat lawns, winding roads, and a promise of peace. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and predictable. Just what I needed. I bought a modest one-story on the edge of the neighborhood, with a detached garage that was begging for purpose. I transformed it into a workshop, my sanctuary. Not for business, just for me. Restoring vintage motorcycles had become more than a hobby, it was therapy. Turning wrenches, polishing chrome, the gentle purr of rebuilt engines, it kept my hands busy and my mind still. But Pinebrook had a parasite. Her name was Karen Delacroix. She introduced herself on the day I moved in, wearing an HOA badge like a sheriff's star and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm the acting president of the Homeowners Association," she said, offering a hand as rigid as her posture. "We like to keep everything orderly here." I nodded politely, shaking her hand. "I just want to be left alone to tinker with bikes." Her smile thinned. "Hopefully you won't be violating any covenants. We do enforce them." At the time I thought nothing of it. Every neighborhood has someone like her, a busybody with too much time and too little purpose. But I didn't understand the kind of control Karen craved. Within a week, I'd received my first friendly reminder, a paper flyer tucked into my door. Trash bins must be stored out of sight within 3 hours of pickup. Then came another, lawn must be kept under 2.5 inches in length, and another, exterior workshop activities are subject to HOA approval. That last one caught my eye. Wasn't doing anything exterior. Everything stayed inside the garage, insulated, soundproofed, and sealed. I didn't make noise. I didn't invite trouble, but Karen didn't care about noise. She cared about control. One afternoon, I caught her standing at the edge of my property, snapping photos of my closed garage door. Her little dog yapped at her feet like a warning siren. "Everything okay, Karen?" I asked from my porch. She didn't flinch. "Just routine documentation, HOA protocol." "For what?" "For whatever we decide needs reviewing," she replied, without a hint of irony. That night, I reviewed the HOA bylaws, 42 pages of restrictive nonsense, but nowhere did it say personal use of a detached garage was prohibited. I highlighted that section. The next morning, a letter arrived, an official HOA violation notice taped right to my mailbox. Subject: unauthorized workshop. Immediate compliance required. I called her. "This isn't a business," I explained. "It's a hobby. I'm not selling. I'm not renting. I keep to myself." "You're inviting a certain aesthetic," she said over the phone, her voice oozing with false sweetness. "Motorcycles aren't in keeping with the neighborhood's vision." I nearly laughed. "What vision is that?" "Clean, quiet, lawful. I'm not breaking any laws." "Then prove it." Click. I stood in my driveway, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dead tone. Something about that call sank into my gut like a stone. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules, she was inventing them. Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated. HOA notices stacked up in my mailbox like junk mail. One morning I found a drone buzzing over my backyard. I traced it back visually. Karen's second-floor window was wide open. I filed a privacy complaint with the HOA. It was immediately dismissed. The next day, Karen strolled past while I unloaded a new carburetor from the back of my truck. "No," she said, pausing just inside my driveway. "It'd be easier if you just shut it down. We can avoid more paperwork that way." "I'm not breaking any rules," I replied. She tilted her head. "Rules can change." And that's when I realized this wasn't about a workshop. It was about power. She saw me as a threat to her kingdom of cookie-cutter control. And in her world, threats weren't tolerated. I shut the tailgate and looked her square in the eye. "I don't intimidate easy, Karen." She smiled tightly. "Neither do one." She walked off, her dog yapping behind her like a punctuation mark. From that moment on, it wasn't just a hobby shop anymore. It was a line in the sand, and Karen had just dared me to cross it. It started with a missing part. A box of precision machine pistons I'd ordered vanished from my porch. The tracking showed delivered. But when I checked the footage from the camera mounted above my garage, nothing. Just Karen walking her dog, slowing down near my steps, eyeing the package like it was a live grenade. I confronted her the next morning. "See any boxes yesterday, Karen?" She didn't blink. "Maybe the wind took it. Pistons don't blow away." She pursed her lips. "Then perhaps you should consider more secure delivery options." I didn't respond. I just stared long enough for her to flinch. That was her. Telkaran thrived when she felt in control. But the moment you stared her down like an equal or worse, a superior, she recoiled like a snake too close to the fire. A week passed, then came the anonymous complaints to the county. Noise violations, fumes, suspicion of unlicensed activity. I knew where they came from. Each time I opened a notice, it had her handwriting all over it, meticulously worded, obsessively punctuated, dripping with petty spite. I installed blackout shades on the workshop windows, put up a new 6-foot privacy fence, even set up a no trespassing sign. Still, I'd catch her loitering on the sidewalk with binoculars, pretending to check her dog's leash. Then came the storm. It rolled in fast sheets of rain, thunder rumbling like distant artillery. I was in the zone, tuning the engine of a 1948 Vincent Black Shadow. My sleeves rolled up, the radio murmuring blues in the background. That's when the door burst open. I turned, socket wrench in hand. Karen stood dripping in the doorway, soaked to the bone, eyes wild with vindication. "This ends now," she barked, slamming the door shut behind her. My workshop was my refuge. No one entered without my say. But there she was, tracking mud and rain across the floor, surveying the space, like she owned it. "You're trespassing," I said calmly. "I'm inspecting. You're not qualified. I'm the HOA president. I don't need permission. You're acting president. Big difference." She ignored me and walked deeper inside, eyes sweeping across my tools. "Workbench, the old posters on the walls. I see multiple violations," she muttered. "Unauthorized electrical hazardous materials. Unsafe storage of fuel. There's nothing unsafe here, not by your standards." She made a point of sitting down on my stool crossing, her legs like a judge handing down a sentence. "I'm not leaving," she said with finality. My jaw tightened. "You sure about that?" "I've documented enough. You'll be hearing from the board and probably the county." I leaned against the tool chest, trying not to let the rising heat in my chest take over. "You've harassed me for weeks, spied on me, lied to neighbors, stolen property," she scoffed. "Prove it." My hand twitched toward the security footage monitor on the wall, but I stopped. "No need. I had something better, okay?" I said softly, walking to the door. "Stay as long as you want." She blinked. "What?" I stepped outside. Then I closed the door. Click. I threw the bolt from inside. Muffled pounding erupted almost immediately. "We opened this door right now. This is illegal. I'll have you arrested." I walked over to the breaker box mounted on the outer wall. Lights were still on inside. Ventilation was running. She wasn't in danger, but she was definitely uncomfortable. Good for 15 minutes, I let her yell. Then it got quiet. That's when I grabbed my phone and made the call. "Sheriff's office." The dispatcher answered. "Yeah, I've got a trespasser in my garage. She entered without permission. I've locked her in to prevent damage." Name: Eli Masters. Location: Pinebrook Estates. "You'll want to bring Deputy Wallace. He knows me. We'll send a unit." As I hung up, thunder cracked overhead. Rain began pouring in steady sheets. I stared at the workshop. Karen had crossed the line. Now she was going to find out what happens when you back a man into a corner, especially one who's built to fight back, and she was about to get very familiar with four walls. Rain hammered the roof like a drum line as I stepped into the open shed beside the garage and pulled out a top-covered pallet stacked cinder blocks I had ordered weeks ago for a landscaping project I hadn't yet started. Funny how plans change. Voice bled through the garage walls, shouting about rights, laws, lawsuits. But her words were muffled now, dulled by steel, insulation, and her own arrogance. She said she wouldn't leave, so I decided to make it official with a trowel in one hand and a 5-gallon bucket of mortar mix in the other. I began building a wall. Brick by brick, layer by layer, I sealed the outer door to the workshop quietly, methodically, with the focus of a man used to building things that last. Neighbors began to gather under umbrellas and over porches as the sound of the rain mixed with the steady scrape of mortar. Most just watched in silence. A few laughed. One even clapped. Inside, Karen had grown eerily quiet. Maybe she thought I was bluffing. Maybe not. I didn't care. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about boundaries. She'd trespassed, lied, weaponized authority, and humiliated people for years. Now she was finally being held in place, long enough to see herself clearly. The third row of bricks went up. Rain dripped from my hair, mixing with sweat and grit. I was soaked to the bone, but I kept going. My arms burned, my knees ached, but I kept laying bricks until the red and blue lights reflected off the wet pavement. Sheriff's Deputy Wallace stepped out of the cruiser, like he'd seen this coming a mile away. Late 40s, slow-moving, slow-talking, but sharp where it counted. A man you didn't lie to unless you wanted to choke on the truth later. He walked up beside me and surveyed the half-finished wall. "You gonna finish that?" he asked, thinking about it. "She's still in there." I nodded, sat down and refused to leave. Walked in without permission. Said she was conducting an inspection. Wallace sighed. "She said anything about being detained." Screamed it. 3 times, of course. He walked to the sealed door, tapped on it once with the butt of his flashlight. "Karen." Silence. "Karen Delacroix. This is Deputy Wallace. Are you okay?" Suddenly, the door rattled. "Deputy, thank God. He locked me in here. This lunatic is trying to wall me inside like some medieval punishment." Wallace looked at me. I just shrugged. "Ma'am," he said flatly. "You entered his workshop without his permission. That's trespassing. You refused to leave." "Correct, I was performing my duties." "You don't have the legal authority to inspect private property. The HOA is a civil organization, not law enforcement." There was a pause, then a shriek. "He trapped me." "You said you weren't leaving." I muttered, half to myself, half to her. Wallace turned back to me. "You want to press charges?" I shook my head. "No need. She's already done more damage to herself than I ever could." With a long sigh, Wallace undid the bolt and opened the door. Karen stumbled out like she'd been rescued from a bunker, mascara running, hair plastered, to her cheeks, face twisted in fury. "This isn't over," she snapped. "I'll bring this entire matter before the HOA tribunal. You'll regret this." Wallace raised a hand. "You bring this before anyone. Make sure you include your trespass, your refusal to leave, and the witnesses watching you. Get escorted out." Karen opened her mouth to fire back but closed it. Something about the weight of her failure must have finally settled in. She pulled her hood over her head, yanked her little dog's leash out of her purse, and stormed off, down the rain-slick street, soaked and silent. Wallace watched her go, then looked at me. "You really were building a wall." I wiped mortar from my hands. "What can I say?" She gave me the blueprint. He chuckled once, shook his head, and walked back to his cruiser. The neighbors began to disperse. I stood alone with the rain, the bricks, and a deep, steady breath filling my lungs. Karen had been contained for now, but I knew her type. She'd be back, angrier, more conniving, with paperwork, loopholes, and twisted language. She'd declared war the moment she stepped inside, uninvited. But I had one thing. She didn't. The truth and a neighborhood finally paying attention, and the next battle I'd be ready. Karen disappeared for 2 days after the workshop incident. Not a word, no HOA letters, no dog-walking surveillance rounds, just eerie silence on our otherwise orderly street. But silence wasn't surrender. On the third morning, I received an email marked Urgent HOA Special Session. It was scheduled for that very evening, an emergency meeting called by Karen herself. The subject line: violation of community standards, vote to revoke workshop privileges and demolish non-compliant structure. There it was, her next attack. Not physical this time, but bureaucratic. I printed the email, highlighted the accusations, and stapled them to a copy of the HOA bylaw, specifically Article 14, Section C, detached structures used for non-commercial personal activities, so long as no noise or hazard is present, shall be considered permissible. Clear, unambiguous, legal. Still, I wasn't naive. I'd seen power used to twist facts before in the military and politics, in HOA meetings, but I also knew this: when facts are weaponized by liars, the truth needs an audience, so I showed up. The HOA meeting was held in the clubhouse just off Main Park. Forward paneling, stackable chairs, lemon water. Half the neighborhood turned out, most curious, some skeptical, and a few already tired of the drama. Karen stood at the front with a stack of folders, dressed like she was on trial but determined to win anyway. She didn't even look at me. While gathered here, she began to address a serious breach of community decorum, one that threatens not only property values but the very spirit of Pinebrook. I sat quietly, arms crossed, eyes locked on hers. She flipped through her prepared statement, listing fake violations, noise complaints, unsafe equipment, lack of permits, neighborhood discomfort. Then she leaned into the real reason, and let's not forget the hostile act of imprisonment. This individual, she jabbed a finger in my direction, sealed me inside his structure like some caveman revenge fantasy. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Not supportive ones. I stood. "May I respond?" Karen opened her mouth to object, but Chairwoman Eliza Garcia, an older woman who had grown weary of Karen's drama months ago, held up a hand. "You may." I walked to the front, placed my papers down, and spoke plainly. "I moved here for peace. I turned my detached garage into a private workspace. No business, no noise, complaints, just restoration. The bylaws permit this. I have the clause right here." I held it up. Several board members leaned forward. "Karen entered my workshop without permission. That's trespassing." When she refused to leave, I did what I had to: lock the door and called the sheriff. I didn't hurt her. I didn't threaten her. I followed protocol. Whispers stirred through the room. I flipped to a second page. "Furthermore, Karen has submitted no fewer than 17 complaints against me, none substantiated. She has surveilled my home, taken unauthorized photos, and distributed them without consent." I looked directly at her now. "This isn't about a workshop, it's about control. And it's time we ask if she is the one violating the spirit of this community." Silence. Then Eliza cleared her throat. "We'll hold a board vote now first, on whether Mr. Masters' workshop violates HOA policy." 7 hands rose in unison. "Unanimous," Eliza said. "The workshop stands." Karen's mouth fell open. "Second," Eliza continued, "a vote on whether Ms. Delacroix's actions constitute abuse of authority." 6 hands rose. The 7th, Karen's own, remained frozen in the air, caught between defiance and disbelief. "Eliza, this is a circus. You can't. You've embarrassed this board, this community, and yourself." Eliza cut in firmly. "Effective immediately. Your authority as acting president is revoked. A new election will be held next month." Gasps. Then applause. Karen stood in stunned silence. Her papers fluttered from her hands and scattered like dry leaves. She didn't say another word, just turned, grabbed her handbag, and left. By morning, a moving van was parked in her driveway. By evening, she was gone. No goodbye, no farewell newsletter, just vanished, as if swallowed by the same bricks she once tried to bury others beneath. I returned to my workshop that night, flipped on the light, and looked at the now unsealed wall. I had removed the bricks earlier, carefully, piece by piece, not because I needed to, but because it felt like the right way to end it. That space stood empty now, a little scarred, but stronger than ever. Like me, I sat on my stool, turned the radio dial, and picked up a socket wrench. The steady hum of freedom filled the room. No more cameras, no more noise, just me, the bike, and the sound of something finally, truly done.